Hi there, I'm Danielle from Live Well Bake Often. Today I'm going to show you how to make one of my favorite pie recipes ever, my homemade pumpkin pie. I've been making this pie for several years now, and every time I do, people always go crazy for it. It's filled with a thick layer of pumpkin filling and the perfect amount of spices to really complement the flavor of the pumpkin. I promise this will be the best pumpkin pie recipe you ever try, so let's get started. To make this pie, I'm starting with my pie crust. Now, if you want to make this recipe a little bit easier, you can use a store-bought one, but today I'm going to use my homemade pie crust recipe, which I will link to in the description below. The first thing that I'll do is roll out my pie crust. To do that, I'll flour my surface, then place the dough on top and flour the top of the dough a little bit. Then use my rolling pin to roll it out. And as you're rolling the dough, you want to make sure to keep your surface and the top of the dough floured really well. After every few rolls, give the dough a quarter turn to make sure it's not sticking to your surface and ensure it's rolling out evenly. Okay, this looks good. Now, if you want to make sure that your pie crust will fit in your dish, just turn your dish upside down and take a look at it. You want the crust to be a little bigger than your dish since it will need to fit down into it. There are several ways that you can transfer your pie crust into your dish. What I like to do is roll my pie crust up over my rolling pin, then unroll it over the dish, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. Then I'll just work the pie crust into the dish and trim off any excess dough. At this point, you can go ahead and decorate the edges however you like. Since I'm going for a rustic look today, I'll just tuck them under and call it good. Now that this is all ready, I'll pop this into the refrigerator for 15 to 20 minutes so that it can chill while the oven is preheating to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Now it's time to blind bake the pie crust. If you're not familiar with this term, it simply means that we're going to bake the pie crust a little while on its own before we add the filling. The reason that you want to do this is so that the bottom of the pie crust stays crisp and doesn't end up soggy. And since the filling needs to be baked too, we're just going to partially bake the pie crust. First, I'll prick the bottom of the crust using a fork. In order to partially bake it without it shrinking up like crazy, I'll line the bottom of the dough with some parchment paper. Then I'll pour some dry beans in it. Now you can use pie weights if you have some. I like to use dried beans because they're inexpensive and they work just as good. Then I'll just bake it like this at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. Okay, this is done now, and you can see that the pie weights have helped to keep its shape. At this point, I'm going to lift up the parchment paper and remove them from the pie crust. Now you can see that the bottom isn't very cooked since we had the parchment paper and the pie weights in there. So I'll pop this back into the oven for 5 more minutes so that the bottom can bake a little bit more. The pie crust is out of the oven now, so I'll set it aside and start on the filling. You'll also want to reduce your oven temperature to 375 degrees Fahrenheit so that the filling can bake at a slightly lower temperature. For the filling, I'll be starting with 1 cup of light brown sugar. Next, I'm adding 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour and half a teaspoon of salt. Now I'll go ahead and add the spices into this mixture. For the spices, I'm using 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger, half a teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and 1/8 teaspoon of ground cloves. And then I'll just give this a good mix until it's well combined. I'll go ahead and set this aside and then whisk together the wet ingredients. For the wet ingredients, I'm starting with 3 large eggs. Then I'll just take a whisk and lightly beat the eggs so that they'll mix together better with the other ingredients. Next, I'm adding in 1 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree, and you want to make sure to use actual pumpkin and not pumpkin pie filling. They're not the same thing. Pumpkin pie filling is already sweetened and it has spices added to it. The only ingredient on the back of the can should say pumpkin. Next, I'm adding in 1 1/4 cups of evaporated milk, and you want to make sure to use evaporated milk here too, not sweetened condensed milk. They're not the same thing. Sweetened condensed milk is much thicker and it's sweeter and it won't work very well in this pie, so make sure you have evaporated milk. Then I'll just take my whisk and mix all of these together until they're well combined. Now I'll take my dry ingredients and add them to the wet ingredients. And then just give these a good mix until they're fully combined. Now that the filling is all ready, I'll pour it into the partially baked pie crust. And I'll just put this back into the oven and let it bake for 45 to 50 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if the edges of your crust start to brown too much before it's finished baking, you can top it with a pie crust shield or use some foil around the edges to prevent them from browning too much. The pie is done now, and you can tell that it's ready because the center will be almost set but still a little wobbly. I'm going to go ahead and let this cool completely at room temperature, then refrigerate it for several hours so that it's easy to slice into. All right, my pie is fully chilled now, so I'll slice into it and show you what it looks like. Look how amazing this looks. I literally can't wait to eat this piece of pie. If you want to add something a little extra, you can top it with some homemade whipped cream, which I will link to in the description below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you get a chance to try this recipe, don't forget to leave a comment and let me know. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.